5 years had drifted by since high school graduation, leaving Eli in the quiet hum of a nondescript office cubicle. In that same year, the familiar pressure from his family began to mount, a gentle but persistent push towards marriage. For a beta, they argued, a whirlwind romance wasn't the goal. Stability and the fulfillment of life's expected milestones were paramount. He was wrestling with how to gracefully decline yet another setup when a message illuminated his phone's screen. It was from Caleb. The text asked if he was coming to the class reunion in a couple of days. A reunion? He vaguely recalled seeing a notification about it in a group chat, a fleeting glimpse he'd quickly dismissed. The uncertainty of one particular person's attendance had been enough to deter him from RSVPing. As he hesitated, another message buzzed, this one from his mother. It was the usual refrain, questioning his pickiness and reminding him that as a beta, he shouldn't be aiming for the stars, for some dramatic alpha or omega affair. He ignored his mother's well-meaning lecture and reopened his chat with Caleb. He typed that he would be there. The reply was instantaneous, a cheerful confirmation that Caleb would add his name to the list. Across town, in the low light of a polished bar, Caleb's mouth curved into a triumphant smile. He switched from texting to a voice memo, his patience for typing worn thin. He told the class president that Eli was coming and to make sure he was on the list. Mark, sitting beside him, couldn't help but rib him about his obvious delight, asking if he'd finally managed to summon his old childhood friend. Caleb's response was full of smug satisfaction. He boasted that Eli hadn't even signed up until he, personally, had extended the invitation. Mark made a playful sound of derision and turned his attention to the third man at their table, the one who had remained silent through the exchange. He prompted Adrian to say something, to deflate Caleb's puffed-up ego. The man in question didn't respond immediately. He first extinguished the cigarette in his hand, his handsome features momentarily obscured by a dissipating cloud of smoke. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rasp, textured by the nicotine. He said there was nothing to say. It was indeed a reason to be pleased. Seeing he'd find no ally in Adrian, Mark shrugged and pivoted back to bickering with Caleb over some other trivial matter. But Adrian seemed to be caught in the undertow of the previous topic. He'd put out his smoke and left his drink untouched. His gaze was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. After a long moment, a name escaped his lips, barely a whisper, a sound that was equal parts unconscious repetition and intimate murmur, Eli. Standing before the entrance of the gastropub, Eli felt a familiar wave of apprehension. If he ran into him, what would he do? Would a simple greeting, a comment on the time that had passed, be enough? Or should he ask how he'd been? He paced, caught in a loop of indecision. A voice he knew all too well called his name from behind. His entire body went rigid. Before he could even think to turn, an arm was slung comfortably around his shoulders. Caleb's cheerful voice questioned why he was lingering outside in the cold, teasingly asking if Eli had been waiting for him. It was Caleb, his closest friend, and also Adrian's friend. Mark's voice chimed in, telling Caleb to have a nice chat with his buddy out in the winter air while he and Adrian headed inside. Eli was frozen solid, not daring to even glance to the side. Caleb was saying something next to his ear, but the words were a meaningless buzz. As the other two figures moved away, Adrian's silhouette became an unavoidable presence in his peripheral vision. He seemed taller, perhaps a little leaner. He never once looked back before disappearing through the hotel doors. A bitter, self-mocking laugh threatened to bubble up in Eli's throat. 5 years, and they were nothing more than the most distant of classmates. They hadn't been close then, and they were even less so now. Caleb nudged him, remarking on the cold and suggesting they go in. Eli nodded numbly and followed him inside. A selfish impulse still drove him. Even if Adrian had no memory of him, a desperate part of him yearned to be closer. So he allowed Caleb to lead him to their table, seating him right beside his friend. Between Eli and Adrian, there was now only a single person. It was just like high school, when one person was the only thing that separated them from potential friendship. But 8 years had passed, and the distance remained. Not far, not near. It felt like an insurmountable wall stood between them. An event like this typically called for drinks, but the man whose memory was tangled with an alcohol-fueled mistake was just a few feet away. Eli couldn't bring himself to drink in front of him. Caleb, ever perceptive, noticed his reluctance and intercepted a beer being passed his way. He told the others to just get Eli some juice. A true friend. Eli offered him a grateful smile, which was when his eyes accidentally met Adrian's. The look he received was frigid, the kind one reserves for a complete stranger. Eli's smile instantly vanished, his gaze dropping to the table as his heart began to pound a frantic, chaotic rhythm against his ribs. After a few rounds of drinks had circulated, the conversation eventually turned to him. A former classmate asked if he had a partner, curious if they were an alpha, beta, or omega. He had initially just shaken his head, but then he felt Adrian's attention shift in his direction. His throat tightened, and he clarified with a slight stammer that he was single, adding that if he were looking, it would certainly be for another beta. The girl who asked nodded, her tone tinged with something like pity, as she remarked that it was a shame someone as attractive as Eli was just a beta. Caleb leaned over, draping a heavy arm over his shoulders, and loudly questioned what was wrong with being a beta, joking that there was no rule saying betas could only date other betas. Eli offered a weak smile and gently removed Caleb's arm. Though he knew his friend was only kidding, he quietly murmured that it was just more suitable for a beta to find another beta. The moment the words left his mouth, he felt an intense gaze lock onto him. He looked up and found Adrian staring directly at him, his expression distant, as if lost in thought. A jolt of panic shot through Eli, and he quickly, clumsily, looked away. The spotlight then moved to Adrian. Someone asked him, a man of his caliber, surely he was already taken. Eli lowered his head, feigning interest in his juice, but his ears were strained, listening more intently than anyone. Adrian confirmed it. He had a fiancée, and they were getting married soon. It was true then. Eli's hand, wrapped around his glass, tried to tighten, but his muscles refused to obey. A frown creased Caleb's brow as he questioned Adrian, demanding to know when he got a fiancée and why he hadn't heard anything about it. Adrian's gaze drifted non-committally towards Caleb, but in his periphery, he noted that the person beside him had not looked up, seemingly indifferent to the news. He explained that she wasn't keen on others knowing about their relationship, so he had kept it quiet. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the group, people wondering aloud what kind of incredible omega would be reluctant to be seen with an alpha as exceptional as Adrian. A bitter smile touched Adrian's lips, his tone laced with an unplaceable sorrow. He mused aloud that he also wanted to know why she just couldn't seem to want him. The instant he finished speaking, Eli shot to his feet. He offered an apologetic smile to the table, excusing himself to use the restroom. A splash of cold water did little to wash away the stinging moisture that had no business being in his eyes. He felt utterly dejected, even though he had no right to be. Lacking the courage to return to the table, he pulled out his phone and sent Caleb a message, claiming he felt unwell and was heading home, asking him to make his apologies. As he pocketed his phone and pushed open the restroom door, he looked up and collided with the unwavering gaze of Adrian. He was smoking, Eli watched as he slowly lowered the cigarette, exhaling a plume of white smoke. When had he started that habit? Eli distinctly remembered how much he'd despised people smoking near him in high school. Every time Eli had been around, he'd seen Adrian scowling, telling others to put their cigarettes out. Was it because of her, his fiancée? The thought that this might be the reason caused a painful swelling in his chest, and his eyes began to burn again. He quickly averted his gaze, unable to look at that face, and quickened his pace. If the Eli of that moment, so desperate to flee, had dared to look back, he would have noticed that the alpha state was far from stable. Unstable enough that even a beta, unable to detect pheromones, would have sensed something was wrong from the crimson blooming in his eyes and the severe, cold set of his features. But Eli didn't look back. He had no time to look back. He only had time to register a sharp, piercing pain in the back of his neck before the world went black. In a hazy, dreamlike state, he heard someone whispering in his ear. The voice, soft and persuasive, asked if it would be nice to become an omega, the kind that could only survive on his pheromones for the rest of his life. That way, the voice reasoned, he would only ever look at him. The tone was gentle, almost consultative, yet it sent an involuntary shiver of pure cold through his entire body. He wanted to say no. He wanted to ask how a beta could possibly become an omega, but he couldn't form a single word. His eyelids, heavy as lead, refused to open. When he woke again, it was to a room that was entirely alien. Intricately carved furniture and a brilliant chandelier spoke of a wealth and status far beyond his own. He tried several times to sit up, but each attempt left him collapsing back onto the mattress, panting for breath. The click of a door opening made his heart stop. The one person he dared not even hope to see walked into the room. Adrian asked if he was feeling any better. Eli's eyes widened in disbelief. He couldn't fathom why he was here, in Adrian's home. A faint smile touched Adrian's lips as he set a tray down, asking if Eli truly didn't remember him. Eli managed a small, nasal sound of affirmation, explaining that he knew Adrian as Caleb's friend. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and moved to help him up. A sudden surge of strength, born of panic, allowed Eli to push himself upright. He clumsily intercepted Adrian's arm, insisting he could manage on his own. Adrian's eyes flickered to where Eli's hand was pressed against his arm before he withdrew. Eli pulled his hand back, mentally cursing his own awkwardness. Adrian picked up a bowl of simple broth from the tray and, after blowing on a spoonful to cool it, asked how he was feeling, if his body still felt weak. Eli nodded, then hesitantly asked what had happened to him and why he was here. Adrian casually tested the temperature of the broth with his own lips before bringing the spoon to Eli's. He explained that Eli had fainted at the restaurant. He'd taken him for a checkup, and the doctor suggested it might be a secondary classification. Since he didn't know Eli's address, he'd brought him back to his place. Secondary classification? At his age? How could that be possible? The barrage of shocks left him momentarily stunned, and he dazedly opened his mouth, swallowing the spoonful of broth. Only after he'd swallowed did he realize that it was the same spoon Adrian's lips had just touched. A deep flush spread across his face. Adrian, his expression unchanged, simply prepared another spoonful and offered it to him. Eli silently cursed his own wayward thoughts. He fought to suppress the heat in his cheeks and timidly tried to start a conversation. He asked if his secondary classification had been successful. Adrian held the spoon poised, not immediately answering. As Eli looked at him, confused, the faint, rich scent of sandalwood began to drift into his senses. It grew stronger, more potent, more commanding. A violent heat began to course through his body, making him tremble. He had no choice but to grab onto Adrian's shoulder for support, to keep from collapsing. Adrian set the bowl down and wrapped his arms around him. He apologized, explaining he just wanted to release a small amount of pheromones to test whether Eli was now an alpha or omega, but that since he had just classified, he might be overly sensitive. Buried in the crook of Adrian's neck, Eli's breathing was shallow and ragged. Adrian's hand stroked his back in a soothing rhythm, but it did nothing to quell the fire inside him. Instead, a deep, gnawing itch spread from his bones outward. He stared at the exposed skin of Adrian's neck, at the gland releasing that intoxicating sandalwood scent, and felt an overwhelming urge to lick it. But he couldn't. This was Adrian. He fought the impulse, his eyes stinging with unshed tears, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. Adrian noticed his distress and gently tilted his face up, asking what was wrong. Eli's vision was blurring. He couldn't catch his breath and could only pant, his tongue lolling slightly like an overheated puppy's. Adrian's brow furrowed. He must think him utterly shameless. Humiliation pricked at the corners of his eyes, and tears began to form. He wanted to explain, to apologize, but before he could pull his tongue back, it was captured. Someone's mouth was on his, gently pushing his tongue back inside. He was being kissed into a state of utter confusion. Who was it? Who was kissing him? There were only two people in the room. Could it really be Adrian? The man who had a fiancée? An unspeakable guilt washed over him, and under the immense emotional strain, tears began to stream down his face, wetting Adrian's cheeks as well. Adrian broke the kiss, his lips parting from Eli's as he gently wiped the tears away. He kept repeating his apologies, saying he couldn't hold back. Eli was sobbing, unable to form a single coherent word. The discomfort in his body and the heavy burden on his conscience were too much to bear. His crying intensified until he finally, mercifully, cried himself into unconsciousness. Adrian carefully wiped the tear stains from the face of the person on the bed. He then stepped out of the room and made a phone call. The gentle, tender demeanor he had worn moments before vanished, replaced by a tone that was sharp and cool. He informed the person on the other end that Eli had cried himself unconscious and that he needed them to come take a look. A laid-back voice answered, chiding him. The man, Julian, reminded him that he'd told him to take it easy with someone in the initial stages of classification. Adrian rubbed his temples, his voice tight with frustration as he insisted he hadn't done anything, that he had only kissed him. Julian burst into laughter, expressing his profound disbelief. He found it hilarious that Adrian's precious new Omega was so pure that a single kiss was enough to make him faint. Adrian's patience wore thin. He ordered him to get over there immediately, worried that there might be some kind of side effect. Julian gradually stifled his laughter, reassuring him that Adrian was the one who had taken the developmental drug. Eli wouldn't have any side effects. He was likely just a bit weak from the classification. He promised he'd be over in a little while to check on him. After hanging up, Adrian instinctively reached for a cigarette, but then he remembered the person in the other room. He tossed the unlit stick into the trash. The person in there didn't like the smell of smoke. If they were going to build a life together, he couldn't smoke anymore. He had to start now. The next time Eli awoke, he was still in Adrian's house. He had barely shifted his arm when the man slumped in a chair beside the bed immediately looked up. Eli saw the red veins in Adrian's eyes, a sight that was both startling and strangely touching. They both spoke at the same time, each asking if the other was all right. The synchronicity brought a fleeting, flustered warmth to Eli's chest. He shook his head. Adrian let out a breath of relief and smiled, asking what he would like to eat. Eli stammered that anything was fine. His dazed state seemed to amuse Adrian, who reached out and gently ruffled his hair. He asked if shrimp and grits sounded good, mentioning that he remembered Eli liked it in high school, though he wasn't sure if his tastes had changed. Eli's mind was too clouded to register the subtle note of resentment in the last part of the sentence. He just dumbly agreed. After changing, he sat awkwardly at the dining table. A persistent anxiety hummed beneath the surface, a fear that Adrian's fiancée would suddenly appear and demand to know who this scheming beta was. But Adrian's cooking was so exceptional that as he ate, his worries melted away. He became completely absorbed in the meal. Once he'd eaten his fill, Eli felt compelled to offer to do the dishes. Adrian didn't protest too much, instead leaning against a counter nearby, watching him quietly. His presence made Eli's nerves fray. He fumbled with the plates, nearly forgetting to add soap. From behind him, Adrian let out a soft, low chuckle that sent a flush of heat straight to Eli's face. Adrian's voice was gentle as he asked what was making him so tense. Eli stammered a denial, blaming his clumsiness on his brain not having fully adjusted to the secondary classification. Adrian moved closer, his hand coming to rest on Eli's head again as he murmured that it must have been so difficult for him. At his touch, Eli's brain shut down completely. His hands, still holding a plate, scrubbed at it rigidly, his eyes fixed on the sink. He desperately needed to change the subject. He forced himself to ask about Adrian's fiancée, if she didn't live there. The question came out stiff and unnatural, and he immediately worried Adrian would find him rude. But Adrian's reply was not annoyed. Instead, he sounded amused as he asked why Eli was suddenly so curious, if it was something that bothered him. It was so typical of Adrian, always tolerant, always gentle. Eli, knowing he was out of his depth, just shook his head and fell silent. After the dishes were done, Eli was more eager than ever to leave. He thanked Adrian for taking care of him and promised to treat him to dinner sometime as repayment, then announced he was going. He hadn't taken 2 steps before Adrian caught his sleeve. Panicked, he tried to pull his arm free, but Adrian's grip was unyielding. He looked up at him, bewildered, only to find that the smiling man from moments ago had been replaced by someone with a cold, hard expression. It wasn't the same detached coolness from high school. This was different, laced with an emotion he couldn't name. Was he angry? This version of Adrian felt like a stranger, and it sparked a flicker of fear. But just as quickly as it appeared, the hardness in Adrian's face softened. He explained that Eli had just classified and needed someone to look after him, suggesting he stay there for a while. Eli told him that it was too much trouble, that he would just go to a clinic and get some medication. Adrian let out a short laugh at that, explaining that a midlife classification like his probably wouldn't even register on a hospital standard test. When Eli looked confused, Adrian sighed and confessed the truth. He revealed that his company was developing a drug to upgrade an alpha's status. He was the first test subject, and as a result, his pheromones had become unstable. The night of the reunion, when they'd met outside the restroom, his pheromones had been leaking, which had inadvertently triggered Eli's secondary classification. Therefore, he felt it was his responsibility to take care of him. The confession left Eli reeling. Part of him, deep down, didn't want to refuse, but he knew that if he stayed, he might not be able to control himself. So he insisted that it wasn't necessary, that he didn't want to stay and didn't need looking after. After he left Adrian's house that day, he had assumed Adrian would give up. He was wrong. Adrian began to pick him up from work every day. He took him to nice restaurants, for long drives along the coast. Slowly, they started to talk, piecing together fragmented memories. Eli was astonished to find that Adrian remembered so many small things that Eli had thought were solely part of his own quiet, unrequited history. It was as if their high school years hadn't just been Eli's lonely, secret admiration, but a shared experience after all. Being with him was exhilarating, but every time Adrian looked at him with that soft smile, the thought of his fiancée would crash down like a cold wave, jolting him back to reality. He started making excuses. A project at work, being too tired. He could keep his body away, but his heart remained stubbornly tethered to him. Just as he was looking for a distraction, Caleb invited him out to dinner. Assuming it would be just the two of them, he readily agreed. When he arrived at the restaurant, his stomach dropped. Seated across from their table, perfectly composed, was Adrian. Eli immediately grabbed Caleb as he walked in, hissing a question about why Adrian was there. Caleb looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, saying that Adrian was there. So what? They could all hang out together. Noticing Adrian looking their way, Eli quickly clamped a hand over Caleb's mouth, telling him to be quiet. Caleb had always kept his friend group separate, rarely mixing Eli with his other circle of friends. He finally seemed to realize something was amiss and lowered his voice, asking what was wrong, if it felt awkward. He tried to reassure Eli that they'd all hung out before, and that despite Adrian's perpetually serious face, he was actually a pretty friendly guy. In fact, he added, it had been Adrian's idea to invite him. Don't worry. That only made Eli worry more. Dejected, he slowly followed Caleb to the table. Adrian, who had arrived early, was quiet. He seemed to be in a low mood, his contributions to the conversation clipped and minimal. Fortunately, as more people arrived, the atmosphere became more lively. Someone who had just sat down casually joked, asking Caleb when he decided to bring his little wife out. Caleb laughed it off, telling the guy to knock it off that Eli was sensitive. This only egged the others on, and the teasing grew louder. Caleb tried to explain, but Eli knew it was just a joke and didn't take it seriously. It was useless to, anyway. People had made the same jokes in high school. His denials had never mattered, and Caleb had always told him to just ignore it, that no one meant any harm. Eventually, he'd lost the energy to protest. It was then that Adrian, who had been silent for most of the evening, suddenly spoke. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. He told them if they wanted to flaunt their relationship, they should do it outside. He was here to eat, not to be annoyed. A knot of anxiety tightened in Eli's stomach. He risked a glance at Adrian and saw that his brow was deeply furrowed. He had rarely seen him look so genuinely irritated, and it made him nervous. The others, however, seemed accustomed to it. Caleb just laughed and slung an arm around Adrian's shoulders, asking if he was jealous. Eli saw Adrian close his eyes for a moment. Then his gaze seemed to drift unintentionally in Eli's direction. He removed Caleb's arm from his shoulder, his voice now calm as he suggested they order food. The table was filled mostly with old friends, and the conversation was loud and boisterous. Eli and Adrian remained the two quietest people there. After a while, Eli excused himself to go to the restroom. When he came out, Adrian was at the sinks washing his hands. After a moment of hesitation, Eli decided to speak. He asked if Adrian was having a bad time. Adrian turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. Eli quickly backpedaled, saying he was just asking, that there was no other meaning behind it, and that if Adrian didn't want to answer, he should just forget he'd said anything. Adrian shook the water from his hands and paused before speaking. He admitted that yes, some things were making him unhappy. His fiancée had been avoiding him lately. He'd finally managed to make an excuse to see her, only for her to show up with another man, deliberately trying to provoke him. He asked how he could possibly be happy. The confession felt like a physical blow. Eli's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He despised himself for it, but even in that moment, his first thought was that if he were Adrian's fiancée, he would never make him feel that kind of pain. Adrian suddenly stepped closer, so close their breaths mingled. He asked Eli what he would do in that situation. With the question hanging in the air, Eli had no choice but to answer. He suggested that they should just talk it out, that couples shouldn't hold on to grudges. He added that he was sure his fiancée was just upset and didn't truly want to leave him. After listening, a small smile played on Adrian's lips. He leaned in even closer. "Really? You really think so?" The warmth of his breath ghosted across Eli's face, making him freeze. Sensing his stiffness, Adrian pulled back slightly. Just as Eli was about to take a breath, Adrian's hand came up to rest on his head. "Well then, I'll take that as a good omen," he said softly. "I don't want to give good omens to you and your fiancé," Eli thought with a small pang of sadness. But then Adrian's tone shifted. "But if talking doesn't work, what should I do?" He mused. "I still think locking her up would be for the best. That way she would only ever look at me. She would never be able to flirt with other men again. Permanent solution. What do you think, Eli?" If Eli hadn't been absolutely certain that he'd been drinking tea and not alcohol, he would have sworn he was hallucinating. He looked up at Adrian in shock, but there was no hint of a joke in his expression. He looked utterly serious. Eli stammered, trying to form a coherent thought, telling him not to do that, that it was illegal, that he'd be arrested. Realizing what he was implying, he quickly added that his fiancée wouldn't be happy either, that it would only push them further apart. But Adrian didn't say anything more. He just stared at him with a heavy, unreadable gaze for a long moment. Eli's heart began to race, unsure of how to help him. Then suddenly Adrian smiled. "I'm kidding. Look how scared you are. Come on, let's go back. They're probably looking for us." He took Eli's hand and led him back to the table, his demeanor so perfectly normal it was as if nothing had happened. But Eli's mood had plummeted, and Adrian's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. How could he have said something like that? After that dinner, he couldn't get Adrian's words out of his head. He was agitated and miserable, with no one to talk to. After much thought, he decided to confide in Caleb. The moment he told Caleb he needed to talk, Caleb immediately suggested they meet that weekend. After confirming multiple times that it would be just the two of them, Eli agreed. He didn't know that shortly after he agreed, Caleb posted on his social media, "Eli's asked me out for Saturday. What should I wear?" Eli saw it and, assuming it was just his friend's usual antics, laughed it off. In a private group chat between Caleb, Mark, and Adrian, Mark spammed a series of emojis, mocking Caleb's glee. Caleb shot back a retort. Neither of them noticed that the third member of the group remained completely silent. Caleb briefly wondered why Adrian was so busy he couldn't even pop in to congratulate him. He didn't know that one man's sweet victory is another's bitter poison. And Eli didn't know that love could not only make a person feel small, but could also drive them mad. At noon on Saturday, Eli arrived at the restaurant on time. He had just sat down across from Caleb, before they'd even ordered, when a call came in from Adrian. He answered. At first, there was no reply, only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. Thinking it was a pocket dial, he was about to hang up when Adrian's strained voice came through. "Eli." Eli shot to his feet, oblivious to Caleb's confused stare. He asked what was wrong. Caleb stood up as well. Adrian's voice was a pained rasp on the other end. He said his rut had come early, that it was bad, and he asked if Eli could help him. Every instinct for self-preservation vanished. He agreed without hesitation. Adrian then asked if Eli could come alone, explaining that he didn't want anyone else to see him in such a pathetic state. Eli hesitated for half a second before turning to Caleb with an apology, saying something urgent had come up and that he would make it up to him later. Then he rushed out. On the way to Adrian's house, he called the emergency line. He knew from online articles that an alpha's rut could be severe, and that the only solutions were an omega or hospitalization. He didn't have the fiancé's contact information, so a medical team seemed like the most responsible choice. Adrian didn't want Caleb to see him, but doctors should be fine, right? When he arrived at Adrian's, the ambulance was already there. Inside, 2 paramedics were struggling to restrain a disheveled figure. Eli couldn't believe his eyes. Was that Adrian? He'd seen him just a few days ago, but he was almost unrecognizable now. His usually proud posture was gone. His body hunched over as if in agony. He had never seen him so utterly broken. He tried to speak but found his voice was choked with emotion. Adrian slowly turned his head. His vacant eyes gradually focused on Eli. Suddenly, the bloodshot eyes blazed with a fierce, desperate anger. He began to struggle violently, trying to get to him, and Eli, as if bewitched, felt his heart ache with the need to go to him. But he had only taken 2 steps before a paramedic blocked his path. He was told to wait outside. As he was leaving the room, he heard Adrian's voice, raw and hoarse, screaming for them to give him back his omega, to give him back his Eli. An hour later, the house was quiet. The paramedics emerged, and Eli rushed to meet them. He asked how Adrian was. The doctor informed him that he had been temporarily stabilized, and that as long as his omega was there to soothe him, he would be fine. Eli bit his lip, explaining that he couldn't get in touch with his omega, and asked if there was any medication they could give him. The doctor's expression turned serious. He explained that medication was a last resort in this situation, and that an omega was the best course of action. Besides, he added, Adrian had insisted his omega was right here. How could he not be able to contact him? After the medical team left, Eli hesitated for a long time before entering Adrian's bedroom. Since he was stable now, getting a little closer should be all right. He gently shook the man on the bed, who now had dark circles under his eyes. He hated to wake him, but he needed to contact his fiancée as soon as possible. He asked for her phone number, telling Adrian that once she was there, he wouldn't be in so much pain. The man on the bed opened his eyes and turned his head towards him. His face was rough with stubble, his hair a mess. A lump formed in Eli's throat, and all he could do was apologize over and over, saying he should have found his fiancée sooner. Before he could finish his sentence, Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist and pulling him down onto the bed. Both of Adrian's hands wrapped around his neck, leaving him gasping for air. He was whispering, asking why Eli kept hiding from him, why he kept running away. Eli grabbed his wrists, trying to bring him back to his senses. Adrian, it's me. It's Eli. I'm not your fiancé. The last few words were agonizing to say, like driving a knife into his own heart. The warmth they had shared over the past few months was ripped away, revealing the brutal truth. But Adrian seemed to react as if he were the one who had been wounded more deeply. His grip suddenly tightened. Eli, no. I won't let you run away again. He repeated the phrase over and over, while Eli's breath grew shorter and shorter. He could only manage to choke out a single phrase. Adrian, I can't breathe. The man on top of him froze, as if waking from a nightmare. He scrambled off him, collapsing onto the floor beside the bed. Eli. I didn't mean to." Eli gasped for air, tears he couldn't stop streaming from the corners of his eyes. Adrian repeated his apologies again and again, his hands hovering, afraid to touch him. Eli had never seen him so humbled, so utterly undone. For a moment, he forgot his own discomfort and turned, wrapping his arms around him. "It's not your fault. Someone as good as you. How could it be your fault?" Adrian's body tensed, then he tentatively hugged him back, his arms tightening as if trying to merge their bodies into one. "Eli, you like me a little, don't you? You came to find me, that means you care about me, right? Just say it. If you say it, I'll believe you." Eli bit his lip, completely losing his composure. He couldn't bring himself to admit it. He pushed at him weakly, telling him that was enough. Adrian slowly released him, looking as though he'd suffered a great blow. Eli avoided his gaze, looking down. "I'll help you find your fiancée." Adrian grabbed him again, his grip painfully tight. Eli winced but still refused to look at him. A low, mocking laugh came from Adrian. "Eli, how long are you going to play dumb?" He struggled against his grip, the pain making him want to cry out. "Play dumb? What are you talking about?" It was as if Adrian had finally snapped. He pushed him down, pinning him securely. "Eli, what is so good about Caleb? What do I lack that he has?" Eli's eyes widened, unsure where to even begin. It felt like they were speaking two different languages. Adrian had lost all reason. 3 years and then another 5. "I'm not waiting anymore, Eli. I don't care about anything that happened before. As long as you love me from now on, you'll only love me, okay?" By the end, his voice was practically a plea, and tears welled in his eyes. Eli could never bear to see him cry. His resolve softened instantly, and he reached up to wipe away his tears. But the gesture seemed to be misinterpreted by the Alpha as a signal of permission. He descended upon him, a torrent of unrestrained need. For 3 days, Eli was irrevocably transformed from a beta into an omega. His gland, which had been barely noticeable for 23 years, was repeatedly opened and filled with the scent of sandalwood. He cried. He was in pain. He wanted to beg Adrian to stop. But every time Adrian apologized, every time he pleaded with him, Eli's defenses crumbled. "Eli, stop looking at him. Look at me too, okay? I love you too. I wish I were your childhood friend. Why won't you just give me a chance? Eli, don't be afraid of me. Please don't be afraid of me. I wanted to take things slow, I really did. But you're always like this." He murmured so many things that day, rambling on and on. In the end, all that was left was a single, repeated question. "Eli, do you love me? Do I love you? My love. Wasn't it clear in every gaze I sent your way from across the classroom? I do love you, Adrian. But we shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't be connected in such a desperate, ugly way." 3 days later, he was back to normal. Eli was exhausted. From that day forward, the scent of sandalwood made him tremble. From that day forward, Adrian kept him in his house, a form of gentle house arrest. But perhaps it was for the best. In his current mental state, he wasn't fit to go outside. He didn't know what he felt for Adrian anymore. When he came close, he instinctively wanted to pull away. When he seemed dejected, he instinctively wanted to comfort him. During the day, Adrian did his best to avoid him. At night, he couldn't sleep unless he was near him. For the first couple of nights, he knelt by the bed, holding Eli's little finger, and slept on the floor. The slightest movement from Eli in the morning would wake him, and he would quickly leave the room. Later, as Eli's post-traumatic reactions lessened, he moved to the bed, but he remained perfectly respectful, sometimes just holding the hem of his pajamas, sometimes just his fingertips brushing his hair. On the rare mornings Eli woke before him, he could see the damp patches on the pillow next to his face. "Adrian, when did you become more timid than me?" He didn't know how many days he'd been confined when, as he was staring out the window, Adrian approached and took his hand. "Eli, I want to show you something." He followed him to a room that looked like a basement study. The words Adrian had said before suddenly resurfaced in his mind. His eyes widened in terror. He wouldn't. Before he could struggle, the door was open. It was different from what he'd imagined. The small room was cozy and brightly lit. Adrian held his hand and began to show him around. "Look, this is our high school graduation album. And this wooden figurine, this was the New Year's gift you gave me. It was the only one." He explained each item one by one, and Eli gradually let down his guard. Then, a notebook caught his eye. He couldn't help but gasp. "Isn't this my notebook?" He picked it up and began to flip through it. Adrian came up behind him, wrapping his arms around him and resting his head on his shoulder. "Yes, you lost it. I kept it safe for you." This was the notebook he had used to chronicle his secret crush on Adrian. It had disappeared one day, but because he hadn't written Adrian's name in it, he hadn't bothered to look for it. Seeing it now, a mix of emotions churned inside him. Strangely, the pages where he had written about his feelings were all torn or scratched to varying degrees. The blank pages that followed were filled with his own name. Sometimes a full page of Elias, sometimes a full page of Eli. His confusion grew. Finally, he reached the last page. A horrified gasp escaped him, and he dropped the notebook as if he'd seen a ghost. Adrian reached around him and picked it up. "What's wrong, Eli? Don't you think our wedding photo is beautiful?" The last page of the notebook was smeared with red paint. Glued onto it were two figures cut from a group photo, two figures in school uniforms. It was unmistakably him and Adrian. It was now painfully clear who had taken the notebook and who had desecrated it. Yet Adrian's voice remained light. "The angle isn't great, I admit. When we get married, we'll take a better one." After coming out of the study that day, Eli sank into a deeper depression. He would start crying for no reason. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was a profound sadness for everything that he and Adrian had become. Adrian, noticing his grief, tried everything to cheer him up. But the more he tried, the sadder Eli became. Why had they ended up like this? One day, Adrian came to him and carefully rested his head on his lap. He too began to cry. "Eli, I'm sorry." Eli didn't answer. In truth, he didn't know if he really blamed him. When it came down to it, hadn't he, in his own way, knowingly enabled him? Adrian took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll let you go. Just don't hate me." But in the end, it wasn't Adrian who let him go. It was Caleb. He showed up at the door, his face a mask of fury. He seemed to know everything. Adrian took 2 punches from him without flinching, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. "Adrian, are you an animal? Is this how you treat someone you like?" Adrian wiped the blood from his mouth. His expression so cold Eli almost didn't recognize him. What else was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to just stand by and watch him be devoted to you, while you were too busy being considerate of this and that to see what was right in front of you? "Caleb, how have you treated him? Don't you know?" Caleb's face paled. "Even so, you shouldn't have done this." To that, Adrian had no reply. He fell silent. Eli sat to the side, watching, and tears began to fall. "Adrian, who told you I liked him?" Adrian slowly turned to look at him. Eli's voice was choked with sobs as he asked again. "Adrian, who told you I liked him? Who told you the person in my notebook was him?" Who told you the person who made me feel so timid for half of my adolescence was him? If it were really him, we would have been together long ago. Why would I have gone to the trouble of giving gifts to all of your friends? Just so I could give you the wooden figurine that I assembled with my own hands, customized just for you. Adrian, if you had just asked them, how could you not know that your gift was the most special one of all? Adrian seemed stunned, unable to answer for a long time. Finally, he came over to him and knelt on the floor, looking up at him, his voice trembling. Then who do you like? Eli, who do you really like? Eli just looked at him, not speaking, as silent tears streamed down his face. The three people in the room said nothing more. Caleb just lowered his head and let out a heavy sigh. And what happened then, Papa? How did Daddy win you back? The little girl, at the age where such love stories are the most fascinating, pestered him for the rest of the story. But he was tired of talking. He casually passed the buck. You'll have to ask your daddy about that. It was his mess to clean up, he can tell you himself. So the little girl bounced over to the kitchen doorway, calling to the man inside. Daddy, Daddy, how did you win Papa back later? The man in the kitchen, carrying out a platter of food, answered as he walked. How else? The one who needed to atone, atoned. The one who needed to confess, confessed. And when it came time to pursue someone, I pursued them relentlessly the proper way. The girl was clearly unsatisfied with this answer. She pouted. That's no fun. Weren't you supposed to do the whole he flees, you chase, he has nowhere to run thing, and then you sacrifice your life to earn a sliver of Papa's pity? And then you're on the brink of death. But in the end, it's Papa's love that saves you. He laughed and gently tapped her on the head. Go wash your hands for dinner. And read fewer dramatic novels. Adrian, standing nearby, chimed in. Exactly. Your Papa loves me so much. How could he ever let me be on the brink of death? He tapped Adrian's head this time, a smile playing on his lips. Oh, shut up. But he was right. He couldn't have borne it. They were two people who had always been in love. They had just taken a long detour, wasting 8 years in the process. Once their feelings were out in the open and the misunderstandings were cleared up, how could they bear to be apart? If you can secretly love someone for 8 years, what hardship, what obstacle can't you overcome? In the end, they had made it past the most painful 9th year and finally, successfully, found their way to each other. Those 8 years no longer held any pain or torment for them. They had left behind only one lesson. Love needs to be spoken out loud, at a volume the other person can hear. Adrian looked at him, his eyes soft. What are you thinking about that's making you so happy? Taking advantage of the fact that their daughter, Chloe, hadn't come back out yet, he suddenly wrapped his arms around Adrian's waist. I'm thinking about you, of course. He kissed his forehead, the corners of his mouth lifting. Really? Really?